this huge loan, Greece is delivering a major blow at the idea of European unity, because this huge loan is going to undermine the capacity of the German, the Dutch, the Austrian governments, the governments of the surplus countries, to appeal to their own electorates for solidarity across Europe. The European leadership of the North is, at the moment, as I see it, wasting its opportunity to bring about structural changes in the European Union that will allow the European Union to stay together and the Eurozone to survive.
Karen Young, our guest in Greece, says that Greece should not take this latest loan from the EU. Do you agree with that?
I don't agree. I think basically this loan is not that important. It's a Band-Aid, really. Today's vote essentially meant that the European Union, the European Central Bank, can put forward a 17 billion euro sort of summer package, right, to get Greece into the fall to be able to service its debt. The real battles lay ahead, and that's why this crisis is nowhere near over for Greece or for many of its neighbors as well. So no, I think today's vote, though it was very dramatic, and certainly for people in the streets, it's been an awful day, but I think in terms of resolving Greece's financial problems, it's a very small step.
If we want to widen this out, Alexei Pavlou, the European Union has been aware that Greece was heading in this direction. Why do you think it's taken to come to this crunch point for anything to be done?
Unfortunately, the response from the EU and the Greek government has been a little bit delayed. Well, obviously the problems start way back, and especially since the introduction of the euro and the excessive lending that has taken us to this point. At the same time, the root cause of the problem is the structure of the economy. Greece simply is not making as much as it's spending. So the loan right now is going to save this. It's going to put an extension to Greece, but it's really an opportunity that Greece has right now to use this, move forward, and try to change its economy. Otherwise, the consequences are going to be severe, not just for the economy itself, but the society. And unfortunately, the spillover effect that will have in other countries throughout the European Union will be too difficult to handle.
Yanis Varoufakis, is Greece ready to change? Are they ready to give up on the 6-week holidays, the early retirement, and all the other things that came along when they joined the European Union?
I think Greece is ready to change. I think the picture you have of Greece is highly distorted. Holidays are not that long in Greece. Early retirement, if you take into consideration the absence of a social security system, is a figment of the Northern Europeans' imagination to some extent. There are problems. There are huge malignancies in the Greek economy, but Greece is not the issue. Greece is just a canary in the mine, as you said before. The issue is very simple. As one of the guests quite correctly said, we are experiencing the second round effects of the great financial crisis of 2008. And the international experience must be taken into consideration when we're looking at the systemic crisis here. But there is one specific problem which is unique to the Eurozone. And that has to do with the fact that we are a monetary union which lacks the shock absorbers by which to absorb the shock waves of crisis. Instead, it is as if we have amplifiers. And in the context of this amplification process of the shock waves, the weakest links of the chain break first. Greece is responsible for the fact that we were the first domino to fall. Greece is not responsible for the domino effect.
Karen Young,
we're just hearing,
yes, I'm seeing you nod your head. Go on, tell us about what you think of this domino effect.
Well, I agree. I agree with the point that Yanis is making. You know, this reminds me very much of discussions of debt crisis in Latin American countries, of which I'm more familiar, in the 1980s, and Ecuador perhaps in 1999, when the lesson was, oh, let's blame the victim. Let's blame the country that borrowed too much. well, what about who lent to that country? Now, certainly Greece has some structural problems in its economy, but Greece isn't necessarily in very different shape than many other countries in the EU right now. I mean, Great Britain and France, for example, have over 75% debt to GDP ratios. The difference in Greece is that Greece has been in this state for well over 10 years and before it entered the euro. So that's true, and that's a problem. The other issue that I find problematic is the idea or the notion, which we heard all across Latin America in the 1980s, was that privatization would jumpstart the economy and create economic growth, pull people out of poverty. And what we know, and there is significant evidence for this across the world, but I know the cases in Latin America again very well, we don't see that happening. Privatization programs and these austerity measures really affect the middle class the most. They increase poverty, they increase unemployment. Argentina, for example, after its collapse in 2001, by 2002, GDP was down by 11%, unemployment was 20%, inflation was nearly 40%. So austerity measures are not necessarily the answer to kickstarting the private sector. What could help would be tax code reform and tax enforcement, and this has to do with the judicial sector and the judicial branch of the Greek government. There's much work that could be done there. But I agree, let's not blame the Greek people. There are issues within their economy that everybody has known about for well over a decade. But the issues that we will all face is how to deal with debt. And when consumption is not going to build us out of this cycle the way it has done for American citizens, at least in the last 10 years, we've got to find new remedies and new policies for states to go to get themselves out of these debt traps. If I can just give a local example of what the Dubai government has been doing, which is very interesting. In the sort of restructuring of the Dubai World Debt, which was a private entity but state-owned, right? The standstill was a way to get creditors to the table and get them to agree for a rescheduling of the debt, and it's been extremely successful. They'll be repaid 100% of what they lent, but over a longer period of time, even with 1% interest. Another interesting sort of policy mechanism that is an alternative to privatization is the idea of monetizing some state assets, so sort of putting a lien or using state assets as a collateral for accessing finance. The SALIC program, which is a toll road program in Dubai, has just accessed $800 million of finance to be able to basically say we will use toll road funds to repay that loan. And it works, and you still have the state asset. You're not giving it away. And what Greek people are angry about, and rightly so, is massive privatizations. Once it's done, once it's sold, that's it. There's no getting it back. So people are right to be angry, and what we need to be doing is giving government some alternatives. And I don't see many people offering the Greek government alternatives right now.
Alexi Pavlou, where can Greece get the money from to repay all these loans? We've heard Karen give some suggestions. Is this the direction Greece should be heading?
Well, unfortunately, there is no other source of funding right now. The spread has skyrocketed for the Greek bonds. So right now, Greece going to any other country and getting funds with the current market prices is simply going to be adding salt to the wounds. It's not going to be making the debt burden any easier. So the package that is put in right now, with the support from the central bank and the IMF, is at least keeping the debt level to a certain level, a certain price. A default would actually make it even harder for Greece to go into the markets and get funding. So the problem is really, unfortunately right now, that there is no other source of funding for Greece because no one is willing to give money to it at such low prices that they need.
Yanis Varoufakis, you're going to be living with the consequences of these austerity measures and of the added debt that Greece is going to accumulate. What do you think the EU or the European Union should be doing differently to help Greece?
Well, just for 1 second, recognize the assault on rationality, which is what the current bailout for Greece is. What's happening is this. German taxpayers are asked to provide loans or to guarantee loans to the Greek state, not so that the Greek state can reinvigorate the Greek economy, but so as to ensure that the Greek state can keep repaying already quasi-insolvent French, German, and Greek banks. Those banks know that they're insolvent. So what they do is they hoard that liquidity, just like Japan's zombie banks did in the 1990s. So the economic energy that emanates from the hard-working German taxpayer goes into a deep black hole. This is a recipe for economic and political meltdown throughout the Eurozone. What this current bailout, like the previous one, are not buying time for Europe to fix its euro system. It is buying time for Euro not to do so, to continue to dither until the whole system disintegrates. What Europe should do, to answer your question directly, is very simple. First, stop being in denial about the powerless states of its banking sector. Recapitalize the banks like it happened in the United States of America through TARP. The European Financial Stability Fund should stop lending at expensive rates to bankrupt states like Ireland, Portugal, and Greece, and it should recapitalize the banks. Secondly, unify part of the sovereign debt, transfer it to the center, issue Eurobonds, and therefore restructure the whole of the European debt without any defaults, but without any loans to the bankrupt. And thirdly, we need a new Marshall Plan utilizing the European Investment Bank. What I just outlined very briefly, so as not to bore your viewers, is a rational plan of the kind that the European Union has to start putting into place and discussing. Unfortunately, this bailout of Greece is just another excuse for our Lilliputian European leaders not to get down to the business of rationally redesigning the euro system.
Very varied views from all of you, but what I'm getting from all of my guests is that there's still a very long road ahead for Greece before it gets anywhere near back on its feet. I'm afraid we're just going to have to leave our discussions there. We've run out of time, but I'd like to thank all of my guests. Yanis Varoufakis in Aegina Island, and in Dubai we have Karen Young and Alexei Pavlo here in Doha. Thank you so much for joining us, and to our viewers, thanks for joining us here on this edition of Inside Stories. We of course welcome your suggestions and comments. Just email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.